is dynamic. That means you don't know what data is going to be there. So you want to predict this data type will be there, and you want to show it in this way. That's how you're going to be using that's what you're going to be using recycler views for. And we'll be looking at how to connect to the internet, and that's a very big thing for latest generation apps. So you'll be learning about that, and you'll be learning about how to save data offline. You'll be learning about how to theme your app, and we'll be looking at the jokes app which we showed in the first session. So I'll give a brief introduction again. I'll bring over the jokes app again. So I think
It's almost time, Sharath. I think you can start now.
Yeah, thank you. We'll be looking at all these things today, and we'll be covering unit 2 of the course today. So if you are new, again, this is the course which we are looking at, and here we are looking at the prior programming experience course, and then we looked at Unit 1 and Kotlin basics in the previous sessions, and we'll be looking at Unit 2 today. This is more of the advanced parts of building an app, and you will be needing this for any kind of professional experience you would be looking at in Android field. So we are going to be looking at all of this today. Coming back, I'll be showing the jokes app which we'll be looking at today as well. So this is the app. If you press on the app, it shows a small animation, and then when you click on get joke, it fetches a joke from the internet. The joke basically has a punchline and the description, whatever. So what do you call a sad coffee? A depressed. So that's a joke, right? Yeah. So you could favorite this joke, and it would come under favorites. This is saved offline, so you don't need to have internet to view this. And this is what is called a recycler view. So the amount of jokes which you're going to be having, you don't know, right? So when you save, the data builds up on itself. So this is called dynamic data. You use a recycler view to show this kind of data. So it's basically a list. And then we basically have the settings part where we can change our themes and all. These are the main things we'll be looking at today. And Going into it, as I said, recycler views are for showing dynamic data. So we can load a list of any items in size. So it may have one item, zero items even, or even 10 million items. So why are we using this? So why are we using this is mainly because we need performance. So let's say we have 1 million items. Like you may have used Instagram or some kind of social media, right? They have feeds. So the feeds are infinite in length, right? So you don't know how many posts are going to be there in the list. So you use recycler views for this. What this does is it basically only loads the 10 most common views which are visible to you right now, and then it keeps on loading as you scroll. So this only loads 10 what you call view holders at a time. So what this does is it doesn't load the whole 10 million items at the same time. So this basically improves performance for your app. 10 is the default number, which are in most Android phones. So you could change that number as well if you want, if you're going to be looking into it. So what we need to implement the recycler view is, first we need to add recycler view in the layout. So let me just show that. If you go to the layout designer and then go under the design tab, it's initializing. Under the palette, there is a recycler view, right? You just drag it and drop it. So here we are putting it on the favorites tab, right? So under favorites, we can see we have an recycler view. I gave the ideas RV favorites, RV short for recycler view. So we add the recycler view first, and then we decide how an item is going to be displayed. So what that is a list item design. So what this does is it gives how to decide how you should show one item of the list. So an item is a joke here, right? So what I basically did is I put a text view for the setup part of the joke, the main part. I gave it other attributes like bold. I gave it some margin and all. And then I kept another text view for the punchline part of the joke. So this also has some margins. And I also kept an image button, which is basically a button with an image. So the image here is the heart icon for showing favorite. So that also I kept it on the right part. If you don't know how to use constraint layout, please watch the last session. The recordings I have posted it on the group's description. So we are using constraint layout here to align this to the right, to have it on top of each other, everything. So, and finally, the layout, we are giving the height as wrap content. Wrap content, as I said in the last session, means we are only taking as much height as this item needs. So if it has 2 lines, it would take that much height. So while we are doing this, that means that we could have 10 items in the same screen, right? If you had match parent here, there would be only 1 item in the screen. So you want how many other items you could fit. So you give it as a wrap content. So now we have the recycle view in XML and the items in XML. Now what you need is called an adapter. What the adapter does is it basically manages how you are showing the data. So an adapter is a class which you write in Kotlin. So here, if you go into the favorites folder, which I have put my adapter, favorites adapter. So to make an adapter, you need to inherit from recycler view.adapter. This is provided by the Android SDK. And there is a thing called as a view holder as well. Those are the two classes which are shown in the PPT as well. I mentioned view holder. So those are the two things you need to show. You need to define how we are showing the data. So in the adapter, you basically have three main functions which you override. Override means that you are basically giving implementation to a function that's already there. So we are implementing three functions: on create view holder, on bind view holder, and get item count. As it may sound, get item count is basically the size of the list. So you're just giving the size of the list here. And on create view holder and on bind view holder. So what we're doing here is we use something called as view holders. So view holder is basically a way to attach your XML with data which you want to show in the list, right? So you're basically making all of the things you need for an item into one component. That is the view holder. You only need to reload the view holder as you scroll on, right? So the view holder is we want our own custom behavior, right? So we are making the view holder ourselves. So here the view holder is called favorites view holder. This is the name I gave, and we need to inherit from recycle view holder for making it a view holder. So here we are just getting the IDs of the items we made here. So this is text view, right? So this is text view joke setup, text view joke punchline, and image button favorite. So we are just getting the reference by find view by ID. This also I mentioned on the last session, how to get references to views you defined in XML. And then what we're doing is based on the list as position. So if you are rendering the second position, then what we're doing is we are taking the second element from the list and we are attaching the data from that to the view. So what we're doing is we have a function called bind data that is called on bind view holder, right? What on bind view holder does is basically it binds the data to the view holder. So here we are setting all the data we want to show in that particular item. So we have a position here, that is the position we want to show. So we are just getting the item element from the list of that position, and we are passing it to the bind data function that we have defined here. In that bind data function, what we are doing is we are setting the text from the reference we made here. So the setup.text, we are setting it as, I'll explain what joke entity is in a few bit, but basically think of it as a piece of data. So in that data, we are just giving the joke setup part to the joke setup text, punchline to the punchline text, and the buttons on click listener, we are setting it to remove or add jokes. So all this will be more familiar as we go on with the walkthrough, but this is basically what you are doing. How can we use one view to load multiple entries dynamically? Yeah, so we are only making one list item, right? So the functionality of the adapter is basically to use that single layout and load multiple entries from in the recycler view. So we are using the onCreate view holder part here, where we call layout inflator dot from parent dot context. This thing is repeated, so you don't need to particularly remember this. So you just need to copy paste this, but you are giving the ID for the layout which you made, which is jokes list item. So we give the ID for the layout, and then what it does is it takes this layout and inflates it as much as the list count is there. So if you have a list with 5 items, it only inflates it 5 times. So that is what this function does. And with onView bind holder, we are just setting the data. So the order is we get the list, we get the list as count, we inflate the view which we want to inflate as much times, and then we are setting the data to the view. Okay. And then what we need is also, so in this image itself we have a setup part and a punchline part, right? So there are two pieces of data instead of one. So you can't just have a list of strings. So what you need is called a data class in Kotlin. So in Kotlin, you could basically have a class which is only used to store data. That is called data class. It's usually a class only. So here under the data folder, I have put jokes model and all. So in that we have jokes data class, right? So here we have a few fields, which is the ID, the punchline, the setup, and the type of the joke. So these are the four things which we are getting from the internet. So we don't need the ID and the type, we just need the punchline and the setup, right? So this class basically encloses a joke. So what we are passing is a list of objects of this class. So if you look at the list, it is list joke entity. Joke entity is also a data class, as you see here, and we are passing a list of those objects. So in that list, when we are calling on bind data, so we are getting the particular joke entity of that position, right? So when we get the joke of the second position, we are just setting the second position's jokes setup to the text, punchline to the text, and all. So this is how a recycler view works. You could go more in depth into the recycler view as it's a pretty big topic, but these are the basics which you need to know. And moving on, that is the model data class which I mentioned, the class which you use to hold multiple data together. Right. So moving on, connecting to the internet. So connecting to the internet, it basically needs what's called a permission. So in Android, we have strict permissions for using the internet even. So if your app wants to use the internet, we need to specify it in what's called the Android manifest. So in the manifest, I've shown this in the first session. In the manifest, we have Android manifest, and we write this piece of code here, which says users permission, permission internet. So this doesn't show up as an explicit permission like when you're using your camera and all, it shows up, right? Do you want to allow or deny? Internet doesn't show up explicitly, but we need to mention this here. If you don't mention this, it could encounter various issues on various phones. Your app could even crash. So just mention this here. Is there some special class to store all state of the app? So you can't just store the state of the whole app in one class, right? So you need multiple classes for each pieces. So here we just have a joke class for storing the joke, and the recycler view just holds the list of jokes. So you're enclosing all that data into smaller pieces. So this basically uses OOPS concepts, which is encapsulation. So you could split out all the data of your app and store it in smaller understandable pieces which you want. Yeah, and then coming to the other part of the internet. So to connect to the internet, you usually use what's called external libraries. So libraries are basically other people's code which you can use in your app. So they help you make stuff easier for you. So instead of writing out 10,000 lines, you just need to write 10 lines, let's say, of their own code. So this is not frowned upon. Libraries are common. So what we use is called a retrofit library to connect to the internet. This is the most common library. There are other libraries, but this is the most common library. Retrofit basically allows us to connect to internet resources, whatever it is. So it may be an API, it may be what's called WebSockets even. So we could use this library to do multiple stuff, but what we are using in this app is just to connect to an API. So and then what we are using to parse whatever we get. So what we are getting from an API is basically a JSON response. So it is a specially formatted string. So in that string, we store all the four things we mentioned: ID, type, setup, punchline. So this thing is called JSON. So this is actually a JavaScript object. This is similar to a JavaScript object, but it can be stored as a string. And then you are just basically applying logic and decoding the string back to whatever you want. So instead of just putting commas in between, we are just having a few structure. So let's say ID field has 170, setup field has a setup a string and all. So we are just specifying stuff like that. Yeah, so we use a thing called JSON to do this. So we don't want to individually do all of this, right? So JSON does this all for you. If you know what the JSON is going to be, we make the data class appropriate to it. So that's what I've shown here. This is the JSON we have. So we made the data class here. So what the data class only needs the val ID int, val punchline string, and val setup string, val type string. So this serialized name is basically for explicitly mentioning what the field is. So here we have ID, right? So we are explicitly mentioned map the ID to this ID. So this is what JSON does. So as you can see, ID is an integer. So we are just giving the type integer. Everything else is string. So JSON basically does this. And then coming to APIs. So yeah, we are going to be using jokes API here. So let me just show you what the API is. The API is basically simplifying it down. An API is basically a way to access data from the web server. So you sent out a request. Let it may be what's called a GET request or a post request. You're basically sending out requests for the to the server to get data. So you have a few free APIs if you want to use in your app. You could use make your app based on anything. There are many free APIs for doing many stuff. So this is just a joke API. So it is also free. So this is the link. If you even if you open it in the browser, it just shows up the response here. So if I refresh, it generates a new joke. So yeah, it says knock knock, who's there? Yeah, this is the joke, right? So this is JSON. So if you go under raw data, you see this is the string that we receive. So we are making our data class from the string using JSON. So yeah, that is the API we're going to be using. And then coming on to parts about saving data. So we want to save data to the favorites, right? So what we want to use is we have two options. One, we could use a thing called share preferences. What share preferences is, it's basically key value pairs. You may have heard of maps or hash maps when you're learning programming languages, right? So that's basically that. So what you're doing is we are having a field and we are having a value. So let's say we have a field name and then the value is your name. So my name is Sharad. So let's say the field name is name and the value is Sharad. So that's basically key value pairs. So share preferences is given by Android to store small key value pairs like those in your phone locally. So you cannot store very big data with this, right? So these are basically used for options in your app mostly. So in our app we have a theme option, right? So we can set if that we have a field called dark theme and we set it as true or false. So if it's dark theme, we are saving it as true. If it's light theme, we are saving it as false. So we can store our settings like this in our app. So that is what we use share preferences. And for storing large sets of data. So if you have more complex data which have relations to each other and all. So if you have that, you may have heard of something called as SQL. It is basically a language which is used in databases. So we have MySQL and all, right? So there is another type of database which is called SQLite. SQLite is usually used for offline storage and all. So it has the same syntax as SQL if you know SQL before. You don't have to know SQL before. I'm just mentioning it. So we are using what's called SQLite underneath, and Google have provided us with a library for using SQL called Room. Room is the main library which everyone uses to store offline. So what you need to set up all of this is you obviously need the dependencies which I mentioned before in the Gradle file. So I have all the dependencies here. So the dependencies I've given is for the theming, constraint layout, JSON, the thing I mentioned before, retrofit, and Room. Yeah, Room is here, right? And we also have one thing called as navigation. So that's for navigating between the app. So going into Room, in Room, what we have what's called entities. So entities is synonymous to tables in SQL. So what they do is basically imagine a table which you are drawing in a paper, right? So you have columns and rows, right? So we are just mentioning what are the columns, and then we have n number of rows which you want to store in our database. So here the columns which we have are joke ID, joke punchline, joke setup, and joke type. So joke ID is unique. So every joke has an unique ID, same as you may have your roll number, right, in your class, or admission number, whatever. So it's called a primary key. So you put at primary key here. This is called an annotation. So this is what Room uses to identify which field is a primary key. And then you also annotate the data class with entity. And you, if you want, you could give table name as whatever name you want. So this is the name of the table which you are storing. So we have a table called jokes now with all those fields. And then we have an interface. An interface is basically, it's not a class. We just have predefined functions here. So we implement the interface, but Room implements it for you, so you don't have to know all of that. Just think of it as a thing which we use to do certain operations in our database. So in our database, we want to save jokes, we want to remove jokes, we want to get all the saved jokes, we want to delete all jokes and all, right? So we are using this interface here, and we annotated with DAO. DAO is basically a database access object. So we use this to access our database. Is there any specific library in Kotlin to access external data from network? So yeah, you could use retrofit to do that, right? You could use retrofit to connect to any API you want, and then you could get it from the network. So there are many other libraries as well. There is Wally, there is retrofit, there is something called as fast Android networking. There are many libraries, but retrofit is the most common one. So yeah, and coming to the DAO, we have the insert annotation here, which basically says we are inserting data here. In save joke, we are inserting data, right? So in remove joke, we are deleting, so we give it as delete. These are basically short form queries. And for all of the queries, I have explicitly mentioned the query. So inside query, we give the SQL statement which you want to do. So the SQL statement to get all the jokes is select star from jokes. Jokes is our table. So we get all the jokes, and we are getting returning list of joke entity. So we are returning a list of this object, this data class. So this is what we are using in the recycler view, as you saw before. So this is how we are getting the saved jokes. So as synonymous to that, delete doesn't return anything because you don't need anything returned when you're deleting, right? And then coming on to the other part, which we need is the database. So if you know SQL, you don't just need tables, you need databases as well. So a database can have multiple tables. So you could have a jokes table. If you want, you could have a users table or whatever table you want. So to make a database, you write an abstract class. So again, you don't know, you specifically don't need to know what this is, but An abstract class is basically a class which has its properties, but you could implement it using another class. So if you didn't understand it, that's fine. So you just have an abstract class and you inherit from room database. Instead of annotating, we are also inheriting here with room database. So this does all the work for you, and we are giving it whatever entities we have. So in this case, we only have the joke entity, so we are passing it as the only element here, joke entity. Colon class basically is a way to refer to a class in Java. So colon class, and then we are giving a version number. Version number is, let's say you are adding features to your app, you may want to upgrade your version numbers. So it will put out an error if you need to upgrade, so you don't have to look at that. And then you write a function, abstract function, to get your database object. So this is how we are going to be accessing our database. So through room implements this function for you. You don't have to take care of what the implementation is. You just have to write the function here, and through this function we will be getting the DAO. Yeah, and coming to this part is where it is usually more complicated for you all. Just ask if you are stuck anywhere. So what companion object is, it's synonymous to static in Java. So what static is when you are making objects, right? You usually have different data tied to different objects. But what static does is, for every object it has the same data. So you don't want to create a database every time you are creating an object for of this class, right? You just need to have one database for your app. You don't need to make one many times. So you are writing this inside companion object. And then what this field is, it's called instance, right? So and it has annotated with volatile. So what this does is, in Android you could have what's called threads. So what threads does is, it basically is like parallel execution. So if you, in real life, if you want to do two tasks at a time, you would be doing something parallelly, right? So in your app, if you want to do two tasks at the same time, you would be using threads. So if when you're using threads, you don't want to access the database at the same time. So let's say in one thread you are deleting a joke, and in another thread you are accessing the same joke. It would give an error, right? So you don't want to do that. So the method to prevent all of this is given here. So what we are doing is, we have a field called instance, and we give it as null. And when we use the function get database, if the instance is null, we are creating the instance, which is done using room.database builder, and we are passing the application context. This is the context for your whole app, and we are passing the database class which we made here. So it just gives what we want to implement. So we are passing that class, and we are passing the name for the database, and then we are calling .build. .build builds the database for you. So after this you have the instance, right? So if the instance is null only, it creates the instance. Otherwise it just returns whatever instance is already stored. So if you have accessed it once, it stores the instance for you, and then whenever you access, you're using the same instance. So you are not creating multiple instances of your database. So that is what this whole function does. So this is usually boilerplate. You could easily copy this throughout multiple projects. This is also provided in the code labs. You could look at that. So yeah, that's how Room works. I'll be showing more on the Jokes app. And coming to themes, so we saw dark mode and light mode, right? So when I switch, it goes to dark mode and light mode. So what we do is, if you have the latest version of Android Studio, this is given by default. So you don't even have to implement. So when you open the folder and you go under res, and then under values. In values, you have a folder called themes. So if you can see, there is themes.xml and themes.xml night. So what this night specific parameter means is, it will use this theme when you turn on night mode. Otherwise, it will use the normal theme. So in the night mode theme, we have theme dot material components dot no action bar. So there is nothing called light here. So in the light theme, rather, there is theme dot material components dot light. So when it's light theme, it will just use the light theme. When it's dark theme, it will use the dark theme. So this is how you mention themes. and how you change it in code is using this code. So again, as I said, you store settings in shared preferences. This is how you access shared preferences. So you have something called as a class called preference manager. It manages all your share preferences, and then you get default share preferences. So you have default share preferences in your app, and you just pass the context, which is the activity. So we are calling this an activity, so we are just giving it this is the context in an activity. So then we are calling dot get boolean. So we are storing booleans. Booleans is true or false, right? So we want to know if it's dark theme or light theme. So we are getting boolean, and then we need provide the key. Key is the identifier which you use to identify a field. So as I said before, name is the key and Sharath is the value. So we are passing the key. I just made a easy way to not forget these keys. I had a separate class which has all the strings for the keys. I'll show it here. So yeah, you can see all the strings here. So dark theme is my key. From this class, I'm using it here to access my key. And then we are giving a default value. Default value is false. So if you don't have a key, if you don't have any value, it just gives false. So we are just running an if loop, if check there. If it's dark theme, we are using this command to make it dark theme. If it's not, we are using this command to make it light theme. What this command does is it's called app compare delegate dot set default night mode. So this is again boilerplate, but what you have to know is compat, as I said before, is means compatibility. So it usually refers to supporting older Android versions. So what app compare delegate does is it basically controls your whole app's behavior. So for this whole app, you want to set the default night mode to app combat.delegate.mode night yes. So this is again easy way to remember what we want to pass. So it's already given, right? So you're just passing night mode yes. So that means that for this whole app, you are setting night mode. For the if it's the else part, we are setting night mode no. Will automatic dark theme affect the UI of the app? So yeah, when you are setting this, as you see, if I change it, it just reloads the whole app, right? So if you are setting it automatically or if you're changing it middle, it reloads the whole app. And if you're using the default Android Studio version, as I said before, with theme.material components. So what this is a preset material theme library. So for every button or text field you are putting, it has a dark theme version and a light theme version. So what you are just saying is use the light theme or use the dark theme. So you're not specifically telling it for this button make this color when it's dark theme. You have it generalized for you, so you don't have to worry about changing everything everywhere. So if you want in Android Studio itself, if you go under the small icon here and under night mode and night, so you could see how the same UI looks in night mode in Android Studio itself. So while designing your UI itself, we could check all of this. So yeah, that's how we use theming. And then coming on to Jokes app, this is the API link which I shared before. So this is how we are getting our jokes, right? So what we're using is a retrofit to connect, JSON to parse, Room to save our jokes offline, and we're using this thing called as Jetpack navigation, which I mentioned in the last session. That is for this bottom three options we have here, right? So in the bottom three options, we have home, favorites, and settings. So we want to show the respective screen when we click on that option. We use Jetpack navigation for that, and shared preferences to just save the theme option. So yeah, I'll now go through the whole app. So if you have any doubts, just ask. Don't mind to ask. So yeah, I'll be looking at chat as well. So going through the app, in build.gradle, as I said before, we have the dependencies here. So here the preference dependency is for shared preferences, material for material theme, constraint layout for constraint layout, JSON, retrofit, room, navigation. So most of this actually comes when you create a new project itself. So if you want, you could view our GitHub project. We have all the code of this app is already in our GitHub. So you could just check out the code in you if you want in the future. So yeah, we added the dependencies, And I just want to mention I am in minimum SDK 23. So this is what you said when you are creating a new project. I just like keeping it at 23 because it is a pretty new Android version and you don't want to support something before that unless you really want to. So yeah, then as I mentioned before, I have the Android permission as well for the internet. And then I have multiple code folders here. So mainly there is data folder and UI folder. So what the data folder does is it basically encloses how we are saving all the data. So that the data and the UI parts are separate. You don't have to worry about them being intermixed, and you could use the same code everywhere. So it's just separate. And under data, I have API, models, room, and then a few files. API has the code for all the API connection. Models is the class which we got from the JSON. We made from JSON. And room has all the code for room. Right. And shared preferences cases for the shared preferences. And that's the code. Uh, and then coming to layout, in layout we have all the layouts, right? So we have one activity here, which is activity main. This has what's called a fragment tag here. So what a fragment tag does is it basically is a container for inflating fragments into. So as you see, there are three options here, right? So when you click on each option, you want the respective fragment to be inflated to this fragment. That is what Jetpack navigation does. Storage permission, no, you don't need storage permission for room. That is because when you include room dependency itself, it internally adds the storage permission, but it doesn't access any files, right? It just uses the app storage. So the app storage you don't need any permission, but if you want to have any folder outside the app storage, you want to give permission. So yeah, you don't need the permission in this app. So we have a fragment tag here, and to use Jetpack navigation, the main thing which we need is called navigation graph. So under navigation folder, we have mobile navigation.xml. So here you could design what all places you want to go. So here we have a navigation home, navigation favorites, and settings. So you just add this with the plus icon here. So when you create a fragment or an activity, you could add them here. And to set them up, what you need is you need an ID here, right? You usually give IDs to all the things, right? So the same ID you need to have it in the menu folder. So the menu folder basically has the options which you want to show here. So there are three options, right? So in the menu we have items. So each item need to have the same ID. So everything is linked together by Jetpack navigation. So in the ID, we also have the icon. So the icons in this app are actually, we have all these icons in our app. So this is the logo for the app. There is the home icon, info icon. As I've showed in the last session, you could add these with going to the vector asset part here. And then there are pre-included icons from Android Studio if you want to use them. They are free. So you could add them, change colors and all. So you just mention those icons here and then have the same IDs in the navigation graph. And then in the same fragment tag, you just mention the same navigation graph here under attribute called nav graph. So what this does is it uses that navigation graph in this fragment. So then we have the bottom navigation view. This is called bottom navigation view. It has that specific menu which I mentioned. So the navigation view has the menu and the fragment has the navigation graph. So both of these are linked together by having the same IDs as I mentioned before. So yeah, this is how we use Jetpack navigation. I'll go to the code part a bit after. So and we also have a toolbar. This thing is called a toolbar. Whatever appears on the top with a text, right? That's called toolbar, and that is activity main. And then we have fragment favorites for the favorites. Here we just have a recycler view and then a loading screen. So we just want to show some loading screen when it's loading, right? So that's just a loading. I have it at invisible. So yeah, now you can see the loading screen, right? So that is shown whenever stuff is loading. And then we have the home fragment where we are getting our jokes. So we have a text view, click to generate new joke. A card view. Card view is basically it's synonymous to a card. So it just appears a bit higher on the screen, and it has a boundary. So you could provide boundary, you could provide border radius and all. So inside that card view, we have a text view for the setup, text view for the punchline, and again the image button, and then another button below all of that to get joke. So all of this uses constraint layout. Everything has a margin, text, and all the attributes it needs. And also there's a progress bar again for loading. So if there's something loading, it just appears here. So yeah, that is fragment home. And then to the settings part. So for the settings, what we use is called preferences. It is synonymous to shared preferences. So what this does is it allows easy use to share preferences. So if you have a setting screen explicitly, so if you there are some preset options like this is called a switch preference. So you just switch between this and this, right? So it handles all the saving for you. You don't need to have listeners to every button everywhere. It handles all the saving to the share preferences for you. So by doing that, you could easily save a lot of work. So you learn to generate activities last class, right? So when you go under new, you could go into activity, and then there is an option called settings activity here. So this automatically generates this settings screen which I've shown here. So this is under XML. It's called root preferences. And again, if you go under design, you could easily drag and drop. There are fewer options: checkbox, edit text preference, which is for entering text and all. So if you need to have multiple types of settings, you could have those. You just mention an icon here, a text here, and give an ID, which is the key for the shared preference. So we have key here, right? So for dark theme, it's dark theme. So this is what the key is saved to whenever you want to save shared preferences. So this is the settings screen. And going on, we have something that's called splash activity. As I showed in the app before, whenever you open the app, a small animation appears, right? What that is basically another activity which is shown in the starting. So that is called splash activity. So this activity actually doesn't have any XML view. It just has what's called a theme. So we saw themes, right? So it has a splash theme here. So the splash theme, what we mentioned is called a window background. So we give a window background to a drawable. So the drawable has the logo, right? So we mentioned the logo and whatever color we want to show for the splash theme, splash screen, and we have a theme for that. So this activity just has the theme and it doesn't have a view. Can we get inbuilt boilerplate for settings? So yeah, we could generate the settings page like so. So if I were to generate a settings screen, actually, we just give a name to this, and if I press finish, it will just generate. See, it's already opened and it's loading. So it will generate another settings XML and all, and it will have default options here. So yeah, the default options are these: sync email, reply action. So these are the default options. You could edit all of this for your own app, or you could drag and drop as I showed before. So yeah, it will take a few time to load in. Let me cancel actually. So yeah, for showing the loading animation, we showing the loading animation, we use what's called splash activity. Here, we are checking for the theme actually. So whenever you are using the splash theme, you need to mention it in the manifest. So whenever you are adding an activity to your app, you need to mention it in the manifest. So in the manifest, we have splash activity and main activity. Those are the two activities which we have. So the splash activity has this intent filter part that basically mentions what activity should start first in your app. So the splash activity should start, right? So we have that here. And then in the theme part, we mention it as splash theme. So whenever we start the app, it is set to splash theme. That shows the loading animation. And when this part of the code is run, we are setting it to light mode or dark mode. So the splash theme is reset and it is set to light theme or dark theme. So that is how the loading animation works. Can we do something similar to any other part of the app? What you mean theming or about settings? I'm not sure what you mean. Please put it in the chat. I'll get to it afterwards. So yeah, after setting the theme, we are going to main activity, which is the main activity in our screen. header and bottom bar. Yeah, we could mention themes for other views as well if you want. It's actually called styles for views and themes for your whole app. So if you want to have your own custom style, custom theme, you could have all of that if you want. You could modify all the attributes, change the background color, foreground color, whatever you want. So that is done using styles and themes. So this basically this part is for controlling the whole app. You could have it for each smaller components as well. Yeah, and we are going to main activity. Main activity, we start calling the start activity function, and we have what's called an intent. An intent is a way to pass messages through Android. So an intent here mentions from this activity go to main activity. So and we are calling start. So that starts the activity, and then we call finish. What finish does is it closes this splash activity, and then we call start, right? So it goes to the main activity. So we don't want to come back to the splash activity, right? So we are finishing it. So in main activity, we are setting up the fragment part. So as I mentioned in navigation graph, right? So we have the navigation graph with all these IDs. So what we are doing is setting up with Jetpack navigation here. So we are setting the toolbar from the ID. So we get the toolbar by find view by ID, and we are setting the it's called action bar as well. Sometimes action bar, toolbar, both are the same. So we are setting the toolbar here, and then we are getting what's called a navigation controller. Navigation controller is a controller for controlling where you want to navigate. So it is an all-in-one tool to say where you want to navigate when. So we are getting it using the find nav controller function, and after that we are getting all the set of IDs which we want to show, that are the three IDs, and we are calling a function called setup action bar with navigation controller. So what this does is it sets the text in the toolbar, the upper part, the header part, right? It sets the text to whichever screen we are in. So if we are in the home screen, it just shows home on the top, and if you are in the settings screen, it shows settings screen in the top. So if you can see, it says home here, it says favorites now here, it says settings. That's how that is done using this function. So next, what you're doing is we are setting the nav view dot setup with navigation controller. Nav view is the bottom navigation view, this part, and we are setting it up with our navigation controller. So setup with nav controller, and we are passing nav controller. So that is all the operation you have to do through to make that bottom navigation work. So you don't need to do anything else. So this is how Jetpack navigation makes it easy for you. And then you have three fragments, right? So going on to home fragment, what we are doing is we are getting IDs for all the views in the whatever view we have, and we are setting up room. So in room, we got the database, right? So from the database, we are calling get database, which function which I showed before, and we are getting the DAO. DAO is the interface with all the operations you want to do. So now we have the DAO. DAO is how you access room. So then you're calling a function called setup retrofit. So what retrofit does again is to connect to the internet. So we are calling retrofit.builder.base URL. Base URL is the URL which I mentioned for the API, which I mentioned here. So we are providing that, and then we are providing something called a converter factory, that is JSON, to convert your JSON, and we are calling build. So what this does is it builds the retrofit which you want to use in your app. So then we are calling create. Create basically we provide an interface here. The interface mentions what all we want to call in the API. Again, interface is for mentioning all the operations we want to do in whatever thing we are trying to access. So the option here is called get random joke. So we are just getting a random joke that's called by calling joke/random to the app link. So we are calling joke/random here from the website link. So that is what we are mentioning here. And the response is called response, and under angle bracket we are giving the data class which we mentioned here. So the data class is automatically converted using JSON. So that is why we gave JSON here. So we created our retrofit, and then what we want to do is when the button is clicked, set on click listener, we are getting from joke API. So that function is we are calling a thing called lifecycle scope.launch here. So what that is, as I said before, we need threads. So threads are basically ways to do simultaneous tasks. So we are just launching a new thread. So we are basically calling the internet and all the database using what's called a background thread. So you don't want to use the main thread or the UI thread to call the internet, right? So it would just get stuck. So you are just calling it using a background thread here, and we are making the loading screen visible. And then we have a try catch block here, which is basically to catch exceptions. And we are calling the service. So this is the retrofit service we made. We're calling get random joke, which is mentioned in the interface. So if the joke is successful, this is given by retrofit. We are just getting the body of the joke, and we are trying to convert it to our joke app. So if our joke app is successful and we got the joke, and if the joke is converted to the joke class, so we are just setting the joke to be visible. So there is a card, right, as I showed before. So yeah, designator. Okay. There was a card I showed before, right? So we are just making it visible. We are setting the text to the joke, and then we are setting if it's favorite. So if it's favorite is done using checking from our room database. So if it's saved offline. So if it's saved offline, what we are doing is again launching a new thread, getting the room database, and then we are checking if joke exists with that ID, the ID which we got. So if the joke exists, the count will be greater than 1, right? So if its count is 0, we are setting the icon as not selected, that is not red color, and that is given here. I have a separate function for that. And if it's selected, we are setting it to selected, and when we click on it, we want to remove it. And if the joke is not saved, when we click on it, we want to save it, right? So that operations we are mentioning it here. And then you do all the database operations as through the same way. So we we checked our joke if a joke exists, right? So the same way we could remove jokes, add jokes through the same functions which you mentioned in the interface. So that is what all these function does. So you could just set it to whichever button you want in your app. So yeah, so this function is what I mentioned to set the image. So this is the white heart, this is the red heart, selected heart. Yeah, that's how we are setting that. And then that is it for home. Let me show the favorites fragment quickly. Going through that, this is the views we are getting from find view by ID. And then we are setting up the recycler view. So this is the main part. To show the recycler view, as I said, we need a adapter. So through the adapter, we are passing what we want to do when we are deleting a joke. So that is done through a thing called lambdas. If you have done Kotlin calls, you would have known this. So this function just has what to do, the room operation to remove joke under launch. So we are just passing that to the adapter to set to each object. So and then what we are calling is recycler view dot apply. This is to apply all these things to the recycler view. We are setting that recycler views adapter to our adapter. We are setting the layout manager to linear layout manager to make it a single straight scrolling list, linearly scrolling list. We are setting item decoration for adding lines between each item. We are setting item animator. This is for animating. If you want, you could set this, and has fixed size. So you give this true if you want to have it as a fixed size. So if you're not changing the size of the recycler view, you could give this. And then now we have set up recycler view. Now we want to set up room. So we want to get the data, right? So we are calling the database. We are getting the database, and we are just showing the list using this function. So what we are doing is we are getting all saved jokes, same function, and we have the list now with all the database objects. So with that list, we are passing this to the adapter. So the adapter has all those functions, right, to get the count, display the view holder, everything. So we are passing this through submit list function, and we are notifying that our data has changed to the adapter. So when we do that, the recycler view will refresh with whatever data we have saved. So that is how we are showing data to the recycler view from room. So that is it mainly for favorites fragment. And then going on to settings. So this is not the actual settings. This is the settings fragment. Yeah. So here again we are setting up room, the same function. We are setting up the data. This is for the about and info part. So this is just a dialog which appears when you click about. It shows details about the app. And then what we are doing is we need to switch the theme, right? So the same thing we saw in splash screen, we are doing here as well. So whenever we change, we are setting the theme. And then when we have the option to delete all jokes. So we are just asking for confirmation, yes or no. And if you press yes, we are calling the function called delete all jokes. This again calls delete all jokes in the database object. Yeah. And in the about page, we could open the GitHub page as well. You could open any link through this way. We are again passing what's called intents. This is basically messaging throughout Android. Yeah, those are the main things in this app. That covers it for the jokes app. And going on to one thing which we didn't cover in Unit 2, this is called architectural pattern. So whenever you are making your app, you want it to be easily upgradable, right? So you want to add features on as soon as possible. You want to create changes, add changes and all. So what we follow is called architectural patterns. The main pattern which is followed and provided by Google is called MVVM, which is short for model view model. So what this does is it basically separates out all the code and makes it easier for you to create changes that change everywhere in your app. So you don't want to go on changing everywhere in your app, right? So what this does is it has this layered architecture. So we have our activity fragment, we have a thing called view model, we have a class called repository which controls room and retrofit, which you saw here. So instead of doing room and retrofit things in the activity, you have separation here. So what this view model does is it stays as long as the activity is alive. So whenever we are rotating our activity, whenever we are rotating a screen, everything reloads, right? So what the view model does not reload. So you could save data in the view model such that whenever you rotate, your data doesn't get changed. So you could also use a thing called live data. Live data is a thing which basically means whenever you change data, it live updates. So you could use live data to live update in your recycle view and all. So this is mostly covered in the code lab session. So if you have any doubts doing the course, just ask in the WhatsApp group. So yeah, this would be more of a higher level advanced topic to just digest it slowly. And yeah, this is mainly what we are covering today. So coming on to how you could finish this course, this is the main part. So this is the last session, as I said before. That doesn't mean you just stop here. To complete the course, we'll be rolling out a Google form. So in that Google form, you just have to give a screenshot to whatever the Google developer profile you get from completing this course, right? We get all these 10 badges, right? So you just give a screenshot of your Google developers profile with all the badges. We just need proof that you completed the course, right? So you give that, and then you give the you just share a app which you made. So if you made any app during this event, it may be small, but just share the code through GitHub or Google Drive. You upload it in Google Drive and just share it in the Google form. So I'll be putting the link here and on the WhatsApp group as well. So don't forget to do this, because this is how we are rolling out the certificates as well. So you just give your name, email ID, the screenshot for your Google developers profile, the link to any app you made. It may be small, it may be large. So you have time until December 25th. So this is next week, right? So you have this whole week. I know most of y'all's classes are over. So you could just slowly go through the course, complete the course, and try building apps. So why we are asking for an app is because whenever you're going to a company and all, they are not asking for like how much theory you know. They are basically looking for practical application, right? So they want to know what all practical application you have done of what you learned. So if you are making an app and if you put it in GitHub or whatever, you could just put it in your CV as a project and it stands out than the normal people, right? So this will also help you. So just provide the link through the Google form. The Google form, you don't have to fill it now. As I said, the last date is 25th. So just remember to fill it before or on that day. I'm just sharing it in advance. And again, all the links for all these courses and the recording as well is posted in the WhatsApp group description as well. So you could just look at the code in the GitHub repository, which I've put it in chat or in the WhatsApp group description. And I will share the link for the course as well. So if you are new, you could just you have a week, right? You could easily complete the course within a week. Just try building an app and all. And the recording is shared again. And if you're stuck somewhere, feel free to approach me on WhatsApp or put it in the WhatsApp group. Try building your own app. That's what I would recommend. It may be small, just try building whatever they give as well. It may be the dice roller app, it may be the jokes app which I've showed here, or it may be a unique app which you have thought. So if you want ideas, actually, you try to solve whatever problem you're having in your real life. So if you want an app for whatever you need, you try to solve that by making your own app, right? Then you have the interest and motivation as well. So try to do that as soon as possible. You have a week. Yeah. Is there any questions or doubts? Could put it in chat. Yeah. I'm guessing there are no questions. It's fine. If you have any questions during the week, just approach me as I said. Thank you all for attending today's session. Hope you all learned about Android development. Thank you all for attending all these three sessions actually. Hope you all learned about Android apps somewhat, or at least got the interest and passion to learn it yourself or with the help through this course. I'll be hoping to see your all's apps through that Google form actually. So try to submit something if you want to complete the course. Don't forget to submit that. We'll be posting future updates in the group as well. So don't forget to do all of this. And thank you all for attending. Have a great day, great night, and also Merry Christmas. We all have vacation, right? Yeah. Thank you all. That'll be it for today's session. Yeah.